After my husband died, his kids said, "We want the estate, the business, everything." My lawyer begged me to fight. I said, "Give it all to them." Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed the papers. The kids smiled until their lawyer turned pale when he read, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The funeral flowers were still fresh when they decided to destroy me. The scent of lilies has always made me nauseous, but on that Tuesday in Sacramento, the smell was suffocating. It hung heavy in the humid air of the chapel, a cloying, sweet perfume that tried to mask the reality of death, but only made it more pungent. I sat in the front row, my back rigid against the hard pew, clutching a lace handkerchief that had belonged to my mother. It was dry. I had cried all my tears in the lonely, dark hours of the early morning, long before the guests arrived. Now I just felt hollow. A shell of a woman named Plain Sterling, waiting for the world to acknowledge that half of her had just been buried in the ground. But the world wasn't looking at me. The world, or at least, the elite social circle of Sacramento that my husband, Arthur, had been a pillar of, was looking past me. Standing at the head of the receiving line, positioned strategically to intercept every handshake and every murmur of condolence, were Arthur's sons, my stepsons. Dake Sterling, at 45, wore his father's death like a custom-tailored Italian suit. He stood tall, his posture commanding, radiating the kind of icy competence that made him a feared corporate attorney in San Francisco. He didn't look like a grieving son. He looked like the new CEO taking the helm after a hostile takeover. His steel-gray eyes, identical to Arthur, but void of any of the warmth, scanned the room, calculating the net worth of every guest. Beside him stood Kagan, 3 years younger, yet somehow looking a decade older. Kagan had none of Dake or Kust's sharp edges. He was softer, doughier, with prematurely thinning hair and a jawline that seemed to retreat into his collar. He played the role of the devastated son perfectly, his shoulders slumped, his voice a practiced whisper of tragedy. But I knew Kagan. I knew that his sorrow was as thin as the veneer on cheap furniture. He was looking at the guests not with calculation, but with hunger, a desperate need for validation, for someone to tell him he mattered now that the patriarch was gone. I sat there, the widow, completely isolated. Friends of 20 years walked right by me to shake Dake Urg's hand. Business partners who had eaten at my dinner table, who had toasted to Arthur's health with wine I had selected, nodded briefly in my direction before being absorbed into the orbit of the Sterling boys. It was as if I had already begun to fade. As if Arthur's death had broken the tether that kept me grounded in this reality, and I was slowly drifting away, becoming a ghost in my own life. I closed my eyes and tried to block out the low hum of conversation. I let my mind drift back to a Sunday morning just 4 months ago, before the diagnosis, before the chemo, before the end. Arthur had been sitting on the patio, the Sunday paper spread out on the wrought iron table, a cup of black coffee steaming in the cool morning air. He looked up as I stepped outside, his face breaking into that crinkly-eyed smile that still made my heart skip a beat after 22 years. "Uvi," he had said, reaching out his hand. "Come look at this. They're predicting rain for the weekend. Perfect weather for staying in bed, don't you think?" I had taken his hand, his palm warm and rough against mine. "Arthur Sterling, are you suggesting we play hooky from the gala?" "I'm suggesting," he said, pulling me down onto his lap, "that I would rather spend a rainy afternoon with my beautiful wife than listening to Senator Miller drone on about tax codes." He kissed my temple, a soft, lingering pressure. "You're my sanctuary, Uvi. You know that, right? The rest of it. The business, the noise. It's just stuff. You're the real thing. You're the real thing." The memory was so vivid I could almost smell his aftershave, sandalwood and old leather. I opened my eyes, desperate to hold onto that feeling, but the cold reality of the chapel rushed back in. Arthur was gone. The sanctuary was breached, and the 2 men standing guard at the door didn't see me as the love of their father's life. They saw me as an obstacle, a line item in a ledger that needed to be crossed out. The reception was a blur of black clothing and hushed voices. I went through the motions, accepting stiff hugs and murmuring thank yous, but I felt a growing knot of dread in my stomach. It wasn't just grief. It was instinct. I had seen the way Dake and Gan had looked at each other during the service, a silent communication perfected over decades of shared secrets and mutual resentment. It was a look that excluded everyone else, especially me. By the time the last guest left and the limousines pulled away, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn of the Sterling estate. I retreated to the one room in the house where I still felt safe, Arthur's home office. I sat in his massive leather chair, the one he'd spent countless evenings in, reviewing contracts and planning our future. The leather was worn smooth on the arms, shaped by his hands over the years. I rested my palms there, trying to absorb some lingering warmth, some residual strength. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then, the heavy oak doors creaked open. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. The air in the room shifted, the temperature dropping a few degrees. "Colleen, excuse me, plain," Dake Urquist's voice cut through the silence. He used my name like he was tasting something spoiled. "We need to talk." I swiveled the chair slowly. They stood there, side by side, like a two-headed monster from a fable. Dake had loosened his tie, but he still looked perfectly composed, a shark sensing blood in the water. Gan stood slightly behind him, wringing his hands, looking everywhere but at my face. "Can't this wait?" I asked, my voice raspier than I expected. "We just buried your father 3 hours ago." "That is exactly why we can't wait," Dake said, stepping into the room. He didn't ask permission. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a scotch, and didn't offer me one. "We need to discuss some practical matters." "Practical matters," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling them?" Gan stepped forward, his face twisted into a mask of synthetic sympathy. "We know this is difficult, plain, losing Dad so suddenly. It's been hard on all of us, hard on Tlastidask of us." I felt a flash of hot anger. "Hard on all of us? Gan, you visited him twice in the hospital, twice in 3 months. Dake, you were too busy with the merger to come down until the final week. I was the one holding the basin when he got sick. I was the one sleeping in the chair next to his bed." "We all grieve in our own ways," Dake said dismissively, taking a sip of the scotch. "Let's not get emotional. We're here to talk about the estate." "The estate," I said, looking at the manila folder tucked under Dake Urquist's arm. "You brought paperwork to the funeral." "Efficiency is key in these situations," Dake said. He walked over to Arthur's desk, the desk where Arthur had written me love notes, where we had balanced our checkbook together, and set the folder down with a heavy astatask thud. The sound echoed in the room like a gavel strike. "Dad's assets," Dake began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone lawyers use when explaining complex concepts to children. "The properties, the business interests, the investments. We need to sort out how everything will be distributed." "Arthur and I discussed this," I said, gripping the arms of the chair. "He told me I would be taken care of. He said everything was arranged." "Well, yes," Gan chimed in, his voice dripping with false concern. "Dad did make provisions, but perhaps he didn't explain the full complexity of the situation to you. You know how Dad was. He liked to protect you from the messy details." "I handled the household finances for 22 years, Gan. I'm not illiterate." Dake ignored me. He opened the folder with theatrical precision, laying out 3 distinct documents. "The will is quite clear, plain. Let's break it down." He pointed a manicured finger at the first document. "The primary residence, this house, valued at approximately $850,000 in the current market. It goes to Gan and myself jointly." My breath hitched. "This is my home. Arthur and I built this life here." Dake didn't blink. He moved his finger to the second paper. "The villa at Lake Tahoe, our family vacation home, valued at $750,000, also goes to us. Dad wanted to keep the legacy properties in the family." "I am his family," I whispered. "And the business assets," Broderick continued, steamrolling over me. "Roughly $400,000 in liquid capital and stocks. Those will be distributed between us as well." Each number hit me like a physical blow. The house where we hosted Christmas. The villa where we spent our anniversary every year. The business Arthur had built from the ground up. Gone, all of it. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What did he leave for his wife?" Keegan shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his collar. Broderick's expression remained unchanged, cold and impassive as a marble statue. "Well, naturally, there is the life insurance policy," Broderick said. $200,000. That should be more than sufficient for your needs going forward." I stared at him. $200,000. Broderick, I'm 63 years old. I gave up my career as an interior designer 20 years ago to support your father, to raise you two when your mother left, to manage this family's social obligations. You think $200,000 is enough to last me the rest of my life? "It's a significant sum, Evelyn," Keegan said quickly. "Most people would be grateful." "Grateful?" I stood up, my legs shaking. "This cannot be right. Arthur promised me security. He promised me stability." "It's not personal, Evelyn," Broderick said, and the way he said it made my skin crawl. "It's just that Dad always intended for the family assets to stay within the bloodline asterisk. You understand?" Bloodline. The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. It erased 22 years of marriage. It erased every meal I cooked, every fever I soothed, every corporate dinner I hosted. It reduced me to nothing more than a biological outsider, an incubator that hadn't even produced them. "So that's it?" I asked, feeling a cold numbness spreading through my limbs. "I'm just out." "Of course, we're not heartless," Broderick added, smoothing his tie. "You can stay in the house for 30 days while you make arrangements. We think that's more than fair." "Fair," I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. 30 days to pack up 22 years. "There is one more thing," Keegan said, his voice dropping. He looked at Broderick, who gave a slight nod. Broderick pulled a final, smaller document from the folder. It looked different, less official, more ominous. "Dad accumulated some significant medical bills during his final illness," Broderick said. "The experimental treatments, the private specialists. Insurance covered most of it, but not all." "He wanted the best," Keegan muttered. "There is about $180,000 outstanding," Broderick said, sliding the paper across the mahogany desk toward me. "Since you were his wife, and since you were the one signing the consent forms for these treatments, the hospital and the creditors are looking to you for payment." The room spun. I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling. $180,000, I choked out. "You're giving me $200,000 in life insurance and sticking me with $180,000 in debt. That leaves me with $20,000 to restart my entire life." "Ideally, the estate would cover it," Broderick said smoothly, his lawyer mask firmly in place. "But given the specific terms of the will, which isolates the real estate and business assets from personal debts, the obligation falls to the surviving spouse. It's unfortunate, really, just a quirk of the legal language." "A quirk," I repeated. "You're bankrupting me." "We're following the law, Evelyn," Broderick said. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "Look, take some time to process this. We know it's a lot." "But remember," Keegan added, edging toward the door, eager to escape the devastation they had just caused. "The 30-day clock starts tomorrow, and those medical bills, well, the longer they sit, the more interest they accrue." They didn't wait for an answer. They didn't offer a hand or a hug. Broderick finished his scotch, set the glass down on a coaster, ever the neat one, and walked out. Keegan followed him like a loyal dog. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dim light of the office. I looked around at the bookshelves lined with Arthur's favorite history books. I looked at the window overlooking the rose garden we had planted together. I looked at the photo on his desk, Arthur and I in Paris, laughing, holding hands. They were gone. The stepsons I had tried to love, the men who had called me Mom when they needed money or favors, had just stripped me clean. They had waited until the earth over their father's grave was still loose to plunge the knife in. Bloodline. I sank back into Arthur's chair. The silence of the house was deafening now. It wasn't a sanctuary anymore, it was a tomb. $20,000, no home, no husband, no family. I put my head in my hands and prepared to weep, to let the despair finally take me. But as I sat there, listening to the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, counting down the seconds of my 30 days, something else stirred beneath the grief. It wasn't sadness. It was the cold, hard realization that the tears wouldn't save me. I looked at the folder on the desk. The numbers stared back at me. $850,000, $750,000, bloodline. They thought they had won. They thought the story ended here. But they had forgotten one thing. I had lived with Arthur Sterling for 22 years. I knew how he thought. I knew how he operated. And as the shadows lengthened across the room, I realized that Arthur, my Arthur, who meticulously planned everything from his business mergers to our weekend getaways, would never, ever have left me like this by accident. Something was wrong, and I had 30 days to figure out what it was. The sun that Wednesday morning felt like an insult. It streamed through the master bedroom windows, bright and cheerful, utterly indifferent to the fact that my life had been dismantled exactly 12 hours prior. I woke up reaching for Arthur. It was a muscle memory I hadn't yet unlearned, my hand sliding across the high thread count sheets to the cool spot on the left side of the bed. But the sheets were flat and cold, and the silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. 29 days. The thought was the first thing that hit me, even before I opened my eyes. The countdown had begun. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet sinking into the plush carpet that Broderick and Keegan would soon own. Every object I looked at now had a mental price tag attached to it, a label that read property of the estate asterisk. The antique vanity Arthur had bought me for our 10th anniversary. Theirs. The oil painting of the coastline we loved. Theirs. I spent the morning wandering through the rooms like a ghost haunting her own home. I started in the closet, pulling down empty boxes from the top shelf. I needed to start packing, but where does one begin to pack up a life? I picked up one of Arthur's cashmere sweaters. It was folded neatly on his shelf, charcoal gray. I brought it to my face and inhaled. The scent of him, sandalwood, old tobacco, and that crisp, clean smell of the outdoors was fatting. Panic flared in my chest. If I packed this away, would the smell disappear forever? I sat on the floor of the closet, clutching the sweater to my chest, rocking back and forth as the tears came. They weren't the hysterical tears of the funeral. They were the heavy, silent sobs of a woman who realizes she is being erased. By 11:00 a.m., I had packed exactly one box. It contained mostly photographs and a few trinkets that I knew had no monetary value, the only things I was sure Broderick wouldn't fight me for. I had to leave. The house was suffocating me. I drove Arthur's sedan, which I technically wasn't supposed to be driving, according to Broderick's memo, downtown to see Lawrence P. Higgins. Lawrence had been Arthur's attorney for 15 years. He was a good man, a man who still believed in the sanctity of a handshake, which made him something of a dinosaur in modern Sacramento legal circles. His office was on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sacramento River. The water glittered below, a ribbon of silver cutting through the city. Somewhere down there, people were having lunch, making deals, living lives that hadn't imploded. I envied them with a bitterness that tasted like copper. Lawrence looked terrible. His usually impeccable suit was rumpled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. When I sat across from him, he took off his wire-rimmed glasses and began cleaning them vigorously, a nervous tic I hadn't seen in years. "Evelyn," he said, his voice tight, "I have to advise you in the strongest possible terms. This is not the right decision." "I understand your concerns, Lawrence," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I had practiced this speech in the car, but my mind is made up. He set his glasses down on the polished mahogany desk and leaned forward, his expression earnest, almost pleading. "You could fight this, the will. There are irregularities, questions about Arthur's mental state during that final revision. We could contest it. We could delay probate for years. We could force Broderick and Keegan to the negotiating table. They don't want a long legal battle, they want cash flow." A long legal battle, I repeated. And how long is long, Lawrence? Months, maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years. And during those 2 years, I said, where do I live? Broderick gave me 30 days. The moment I file a contest, he'll have me evicted. He'll freeze the assets. And then there's the debt. Lawrence winced. The medical bills. $180,000, Lawrence, I said, the number feeling like a stone in my mouth. Plus your legal fees. If I fight them, I have to pay you. I have to pay rent. I have to pay for food. I have $2,000 in my personal checking account. That's it. Arthur handled everything else. I can wait on my fees, Lawrence said quickly. I loved Arthur. I care about you. But you can't pay my rent. You can't pay the hospital. I looked out at the river again. A small barge was fighting the current, moving slowly upstream. Sydney, sorry, Broderick, made it very clear. If I sign the waivers, if I walk away from the houses and the business, they will release the $200,000 life insurance policy immediately. I can pay the debt. I can have $20,000 left to find a small apartment. If I fight, I'm bankrupt in 90 days. Lawrence slammed his hand on the desk, startling me. It's not right. Arthur would never have wanted this. That man worshipped the ground you walked on, Evelyn, the will. It doesn't sound like him. The language is cold. It's clinical. It reads like Broderick wrote it, I suggested. Lawrence didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Broderick and Keegan are playing hardball, he finally said. They are counting on you being too intimidated, too exhausted, and too broke to fight back. And it's working. It is working, I admitted. Because they hold all the cards, Lawrence. They have the money. They have the time. I have neither. I'm tired. I'm just so tired. So you're just going to give them everything? Lawrence asked, his voice soft now, defeated. The house, the villa, the business Arthur built with his bare hands. I'm buying my freedom, I said, and my sanity. If I fight them, I'll become bitter. I'll spend the last good years of my life in courtrooms, listening to my stepsons call me a gold digger. I don't want that to be my legacy. Lawrence sighed, a deep, rattling sound in his chest. I've never had a client voluntarily walk away from a multi-million-dollar estate. There has to be something I'm missing here. Their asterisk was asterisk something he was missing. Something I was missing, but I couldn't articulate it. It was just a feeling, a nagging sense of wrongness that sat at the base of my skull. But feelings aren't legal tender. Just draw up the papers, Lawrence, I said, standing up. I want to be done with this. I want to be done with them. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll draft a settlement agreement, but I'm going to make it ironclad. If you're giving them the kingdom, I'm going to make sure they can never come after you for another cent. The medical debt, the taxes, I'll make sure the language protects you from all future liability. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he muttered, picking up his pen. I feel like I'm helping you walk the plank. I left his office feeling lighter, but not happier. It was the lightness of having nothing left to lose. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed in my purse. I fished it out. A text message from an unknown number, though I knew exactly who it was. Mrs. Sterling, this is Keegan. Just wanted to touch base regarding the timeline for the property transfer. We have a realtor coming to assess the house on Friday. Please ensure the common areas are decluttered. We want to make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone. Decluttered. He was talking about my life, my knickknacks, my books. I didn't reply. A second later, another text. This one from Broderick. Mother, I assume you're meeting with Morrison today. Let's get the waivers signed by Friday. The sooner this is done, the sooner you get your insurance check. We don't want the hospital sending collectors to the funeral home, do we? The cruelty of it took my breath away. Mother. He only used that word when he wanted to twist the knife. And the threat about the collectors, it was a bully's tactic. I drove home in a daze. The Sacramento heat was climbing, the asphalt shimmering in the afternoon sun. When I pulled into the driveway of the estate, I sat in the car for 10 minutes, just staring at the front door. I didn't want to go in. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like I was trespassing in a museum dedicated to a man I had lost. But I had nowhere else to go. I went inside and headed straight for Arthur's study. It was the only room that still smelled like him, not the antiseptic smell of the hospital, but the rich scent of old paper and ambition. I sat in his chair again. The leather creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. "Why, Arthur?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why did you do this to me?" I opened the center drawer of his desk. Pens, a stapler, a letter opener I had bought him in Florence. I closed it. I opened the side drawers. Files, tax returns from 2015, old contracts. Nothing. My hand drifted to the bottom right drawer, the junk drawer. Every man has one, no matter how powerful or organized. This was where Arthur kept the detritus of his life that he couldn't bear to throw away but had no place for. I pulled it open. It was a chaotic jumble. Dead batteries, rubber bands, a stack of business cards from restaurants that had closed years ago, a broken watch he meant to get fixed. I ran my fingers through the mess, feeling the texture of his small habits. A roll of mints he liked. A golf tee from a game he played 3 years ago. Tears pricked my eyes again. This drawer felt more like him than the will did. This was the messy, human side of Arthur Sterling. My fingers brushed against something cold and hard at the very back of the drawer, wedged under a stack of old receipts. I pulled it out. It was a key. It wasn't a house key, it was too small for that, and it wasn't a car key. It was made of old, tarnished brass, heavy for its size. The head of the key was square, and the teeth were cut in a complex, jagged pattern. There were no markings on it. No brand name, no do not duplicate stamp. Just a number stamped crudely into the metal, *379***. I frowned, holding it up to the dying light. I knew every lock in this house. I knew the safe in the bedroom, digital combination. I knew the filing cabinet's small, silver keys. I knew the lock to the wine cellar, an old skeleton key. This didn't fit any of them. Why was it here? Arthur was meticulous. He labeled everything. Summer house keys, spare rover keys, office cabinet. But this, it was hidden, buried. "What does this open?" I murmured, turning it over in my fingers. The brass felt warm now, as if it had been waiting for my touch. A sound from outside broke my concentration, the crunch of gravel. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. A silver Mercedes convertible had pulled into the driveway, right next to my sensible sedan. The top was down. Broderick was behind the wheel, wearing sunglasses that cost more than my first car. Keegan was in the passenger seat. They weren't coming to the door. They were just sitting there. I watched as Keegan said something and pointed up at the house, at the second-story balcony. Broderick threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a belly laugh, full of triumph and arrogance. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a bottle of champagne. They were celebrating. Right there in my driveway, 3 days after the funeral, while their stepmother, the woman who had bandaged their scraped knees, who had sat through their graduation ceremonies when their own mother couldn't be bothered, sat inside, counting her pennies and packing her life into cardboard boxes. They were toasting to their inheritance, toasting to the $850,000 house, toasting to the fact that they had successfully bullied me into submission. I watched them pop the cork. The foam spilled over onto the driveway, and they didn't care. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet, like a dry twig breaking in a winter forest. For the last 3 days, I had been operating on grief. I had been the victim, the poor widow, the displaced stepmother. I had been reacting to them, letting them set the pace, letting them define the narrative. Poor Evelyn, she's old. She's tired. She'll take the scraps and go away. I looked down at the brass key in my hand. Arthur Sterling was a fox. He was a man who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He never did anything without a reason. He never left a loose end. If he had left me with nothing, it was because he wanted me to have nothing. Or he had left me something that Broderick and Keegan, in their arrogance, hadn't bothered to look for. The despair that had been weighing me down for 72 hours suddenly shifted. It didn't disappear, but it hardened. It turned into something cold and sharp. I looked back out the window. Broderick was taking a swig of champagne straight from the bottle. He looked like a vulture feasting on a carcass. "You think you've won," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. "You think you've erased me." I squeezed the key until the edges dug into my palm, the pain grounding me. "Enjoy your champagne, boys," I said to the empty room, "because I'm not signing anything until I find out what this opens." I turned away from the window. I wasn't packing anymore. I walked back to the desk, sat down, and turned on Arthur's computer. I had work to do. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to be the grieving widow. Tomorrow, I was going to be the detective Arthur Sterling had married. The 30-day clock was still ticking, but for the first time since the funeral, the sound didn't scare me. It sounded like a countdown to something else entirely. The brass key burned a hole in my pocket. It was a heavy, jagged question mark that I carried with me as I tore the house apart. I spent all of Thursday morning in a state of manic determination. I tried the key on everything. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway. No. The locked cabinet in the garage where Arthur kept his solvents. No. The small cedar chest at the foot of our bed where I kept the winter quilts. No. By noon, the house looked like it had been tossed by burglars. Drawers were pulled out, boxes were overturned, and I was sweating, my hair escaping its bun in wild wisps. The despair from yesterday had evaporated, replaced by a frantic, buzzing energy. I knew, with the certainty of a woman who has lived with a man for half a lifetime, that Arthur hadn't kept this key for no reason. I sat on the edge of the bed, the key clutched in my hand, breathing hard. Think Evelyn, think like Arthur. If the key didn't fit anything asterisk in the house, then it had to open something asterisk outside the house. But where? Arthur didn't have a storage unit. He didn't have a secret apartment. His life was here with me or at the office. My eyes drifted to the corner of the room, to the plastic bag the hospital had given me after he passed. I hadn't touched it. I couldn't bear to. It contained the clothes he had worn to the ER, his watch, his wedding ring, and his wallet. I walked over to the bag. It felt heavy, like it contained the finality of his life. I reached in and pulled out his leather wallet. It was worn at the corners, shaped to the curve of his hip. I opened it. His driver's license. A photo of me from 10 years ago. A few crisp $100 bills. Arthur always believed in carrying cash. I began pulling cards out, one by one. The Platinum Amex, the country club membership, the insurance card. And then, tucked behind his driver's license, hidden so deep you wouldn't find it unless you were looking for it, was a plain white business card. It had no logo, just bold black text. First National Bank. J Street Branch. And on the back, handwritten in Arthur's distinctive, blocky script, Box 379 asterisk asterisk. 379, the number stamped on the key. I didn't wait. I didn't change out of my house clothes. I grabbed my purse, the key, and the card, and I ran to the car. First National Bank on J Street was a fortress of old money. It was one of those buildings built in the 1920s to intimidate you with its architecture, massive marble columns, high vaulted ceilings, and an echoing silence that made you feel like you should whisper. I walked up to the reception desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I told the young woman behind the glass. "Box 379. She looked at me, then at the key in my hand. "Do you have authorization on the account?" I don't know," I admitted. "My husband passed away. This was his box." Her expression softened into professional pity. "One moment, ma'am. Let me get the manager." A few minutes later, a woman in a sharp navy suit approached. She had gray hair cut in a severe bob and kind, intelligent eyes. Her name tag read asterisk Mrs. Abernathy asterisk asterisk. "Mrs. Sterling?" she asked, extending a hand. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy. I was so sorry to hear about Arthur. He was a man of great character." "You knew him?" I asked, shaking her hand. "He came in to see me personally about 6 months ago," she said. lowering her voice. He was very specific about the instructions for Box 379. He set it up so that in the event of his death, access would be granted solely to you, not his sons, not his lawyers, just you. My knees went weak. He knew, I whispered. He knew he was dying. He knew a lot of things, I suspect, Mrs. Abernathy said. Follow me, please. She led me through a heavy steel gate and down a flight of marble stairs into the cool, subterranean air of the vault. The walls were lined with thousands of metal drawers, a library of secrets. Here we are, she said, stopping in front of a box at eye level. She inserted her master key into one lock, and I inserted the brass key into the other. Click. She pulled the long metal box out and carried it to a small, private viewing room. Take as long as you need, Mrs. Sterling. Just press the button when you're finished. She closed the door, leaving me alone with the box. I stared at it for a long moment. This was it, Arthur's final move. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. I don't know what I expected, gold bars, cash, diamonds. Instead, I found paper. Stacks and stacks of paper, organized with binder clips and sticky notes. The first thing I saw was a manila envelope labeled, "The Boys." I opened it. Inside was a dossier that looked like something out of a police procedural. There were photos, bank statements, and a report from a private investigator named *Donovan Steele ***. I picked up the first stack, labeled *Broderick*. I started reading, and my blood ran cold. Broderick wasn't just the successful, arrogant lawyer he pretended to be. He was a desperate man. The report detailed a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control over the last 2 years. There were photos of him entering the Silver Slipper Casino in Reno at 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. There were copies of markers, casino IOUs, totaling over *230,000***. But it got worse. There were emails from dangerous-looking creditors. One read, "Mr. Sterling, your grace period is over. We expect payment by the 1st, or we will be contacting your firm's partners." Broderick was drowning. He needed his inheritance not to expand his portfolio, but to save his legs from being broken. I set the papers down, my hands shaking, and picked up the stack labeled *KEGAN*. If Broderick was a degenerate, Keegan was a predator. The consulting business Keegan ran in Lowe's Angels was a sham. The report detailed a Ponzi scheme targeting the elderly. He was taking retirement savings from seniors, people just like me, promising them high-yield returns, and then using new investors' money to pay off the old ones. The dossier estimated he had defrauded his clients of nearly *300,000***, and the walls were closing in. The SEC had sent him a preliminary inquiry letter just 2 months ago. Keegan needed Arthur's money to pay back the funds before the feds indicted him. They weren't grieving sons. They were criminals waiting for a payout. Underneath the individual reports was a printed email chain between the two brothers. The date was from 4 months ago, right when Arthur had started chemotherapy. From Broderick * to Keegan. Subject, timeline. Keegan, the doctors say he has 6 months, maybe less. We need to move on the estate planning now. I've drafted the new will. We need to get him to sign it while he's groggy from the meds. If we wait, the stepmother might convince him to leave her something significant. From Keegan. To Broderick *. Ray, timeline. Don't worry about Evelyn. She's soft. She doesn't understand the business. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll have the assets liquidated. Dad trusts us. We just need to keep playing the loving sons for a few more weeks. She's soft, I read aloud. My voice trembling with rage. She doesn't understand. They had plotted this. While I was wiping Arthur's forehead with a cool cloth, while I was holding his hand through the seizures, they were emailing each other about how to best rob him. They had watched their father die and seen only a dollar sign. I pushed the dossier aside, feeling physically ill. I needed to know why Arthur had let this happen. Why hadn't he told me? I reached back into the box and pulled out a blue folder. Inside was a single bank statement for an account I had never heard of. Sterling Trust, Cayman ***. The balance at the bottom of the page made my eyes widen. $4,700,000. I blinked. I read it again. $4.7 million. We weren't poor, we weren't even comfortable. Arthur had been quietly, secretly wealthy, and the account was in a trust. The beneficiary, Evelyn Sterling. And underneath that, a medical report from a neurologist named Dr. Heirs, dated 3 weeks before Arthur died. Patient, Arthur Sterling. Assessment: patient shows no signs of cognitive decline or dementia. His decision-making faculties are 100% intact. He had gotten himself tested. He had proven he was sane, so they couldn't contest his final moves. Finally, at the very bottom of the box, I found a letter. It was in a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax. On the front, in Arthur's handwriting, for my Evie, open last. I broke the seal. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost ripped the paper. My dearest Evie ***. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my sons have done exactly what I feared they would do. I am so sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive, but I needed you to be genuinely in the dark. If you had known, your honest face would have given it away. They needed to believe you were defeated so they would show their true colors. I hired Donovan Steele 8 months ago when I noticed discrepancies in the business accounts. What he found broke my heart. My sons, the boys we raised, have become men I do not recognize. They are thieves, Evie, and they are desperate. I knew they would come for you. I knew they would try to take the house, the villa, the business. I knew they would try to leave you with nothing but my medical bills. So I let them. I signed the will Broderick drafted. I let them believe they were inheriting the kingdom. But there is something they didn't check. In their arrogance, they didn't run a recent title search on the properties. Evie, 6 months ago, I took out massive mortgages on everything. I mortgaged the Sacramento house for $1.2 million. I mortgaged the Tahoe villa for $800,000. I leveraged the business assets to the hilt. The money from those loans, it's in the Cayman Trust. It's yours, all $4.7 million of it, plus the $500,000 life insurance policy I took out privately that they don't know about. Here is the punchline, my love. The debt stays with the property. If Broderick and Keegan inherit the house and the villa, they inherit the mortgages, too. The house is worth $850,000, but it owes $1.2 million. The villa is worth $750,000, but it owes $800,000. They aren't inheriting a fortune. They are inheriting a $2 million debt. They will be underwater the moment they sign the title transfer. I have left the choice to you. In the folder labeled The Trap, there is a document called a gift deed. You have the power to gift them the properties and the debt, or you can let the bank foreclose. But knowing them, they will be so eager to sign, they won't look at the fine print until it's too late. Don't let them bully you, Evie. You are stronger than they are. You are the only good thing in my life, and I will not let them destroy you. Call Donovan Steele. His card is attached. He is holding the real will, the one that supersedes everything Broderick has. I love you forever. Arthur ***. I sat there for a long time, the letter pressed to my chest, tears streaming down my face. He hadn't abandoned me. He had built a fortress around me and dug a moat filled with crocodiles for his sons. It was brilliant, it was ruthless, it was Arthur. I wiped my face. The sadness was still there, but the fear was gone. In its place was a cold, simmering fury. They had called me soft. They had called me a bad investment. They had laughed in my driveway while drinking champagne, thinking they had thrown me out on the street. I looked at the dossier again. Broderick's gambling, Keegan's fraud. If I revealed this now, I could stop them. I could save them from the debt. But then I remembered the bloodline comment. I remembered the $30 day eviction notice. I remembered Broderick checking his watch at his own father's funeral. I reached for the business card, clipped to the bottom of the letter. Donovan Steele. attorney at law and private investigations. Midtown, Sacramento. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. Donovan Steele speaking. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Mr. Steele, I said, my voice steady and clear in the small room. This is Evelyn Sterling. I just opened box 379. There was a pause, and then I heard the smile in his voice. Hello, Mrs. Sterling. I've been waiting for your call. Are you ready to go to work? I am, I said, closing the heavy metal lid of the box with a definitive clang. I'm ready to give my stepsons exactly what they deserve. The drive to Granite Bay felt less like a commute to a family dinner and more like a deployment behind enemy lines. I had the dossier from the safety deposit box locked in the trunk of my car, hidden beneath a blanket and a spare tire. The knowledge of what was in those papers, the gambling debts, the fraud, the secret millions Arthur had left me, sat heavy in my mind, transforming the way I saw the world. As I pulled into the circular driveway of Keegan and Tiffany's home, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the monstrosity they called a house. It was a sprawling, faux Tuscan villa that screamed new money in a way that would have made Arthur cringe. Too much stucco, too many columns, and a fountain in the front yard that looked like it belonged in a Vegas lobby. Parked next to a brand-new BMW 7 Series and a Mercedes G-Wagon. According to Donovan Steele's report, both cars were leased, and the payments were 2 months behind. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the weeping widow from the funeral. She was calm. Her eyes were dry. She was wearing her armor, a simple black dress, a string of pearls Arthur had given her, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Showtime, Evelyn, I whispered. I rang the doorbell. It played a melodious Westminster Abbey-style chime that echoed through the neighborhood. Tiffany answered the door. At 38, Tiffany treated her appearance like a full-time job. She was wearing a cocktail dress that I recognized from a recent Vogue spread, probably costing $3,000, and her hair was highlighted to a perfect, expensive blonde. Evelyn, she shrieked, pulling me into an air kiss that hovered safely 3 inches from my cheek. You look tired, sweetie, but that's to be expected. I'm managing Tiffany, I said, stepping into the foyer. The smell of expensive vanilla candles was overpowering. Thank you for having me. Of course, we're family, she beamed, her eyes scanning my outfit, likely calculating the cost of my shoes. The boys are in the study. I've got a caterer. I've been cooking all afternoon. I smiled. It smells delicious. I walked through the living room, nodding the furniture. It was all oversized, beige, and uncomfortable looking. Everything in this house was designed to impress strangers, not to comfort a family. Broderick and Keegan were in the study, a room lined with leather-bound books that I was fairly certain neither of them had ever opened. Broderick was lounging in a club chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Keegan was standing by the window, looking jittery. Mother, Broderick said, not bothering to stand up. You made it. Hello, Broderick, Keegan. Keegan turned, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Hey, Evelyn, can I get you a drink? Wine, scotch. Just water, please, I said, taking a seat on the edge of the sofa. So, Broderick said, swirling his drink. Lawrence called me. He said you were in his office yesterday. He seemed to think you're ready to sign the waivers. I folded my hands in my lap, adopting the posture of a woman who has been thoroughly beaten. Yes, Lawrence advised me to fight, of course. He thinks the will is unfair. Broderick snorted. Lawrence is a dinosaur. He doesn't understand modern estate planning. That's what I told him. I lied smoothly. I told him that fighting you boys would just tear the family apart, and Arthur would never have wanted that. Harmony was so important to him. The relief that washed over the room was palpable. Keegan's shoulders dropped 3 inches. Broderick took a satisfied sip of his scotch. That's really big of you, Evelyn, Keegan said. Dad would be proud. I just want to move on, I said, looking down at my hands. I just want this to be over. We all do, Broderick said. his voice regaining its usual arrogant cadence. "We've had our lawyers draw up the transfer documents to complement Lawrence's. If we sign everything by Friday, we can cut you the check for the insurance money on Monday. You can pay off the hospital and start whatever comes next for you." "That sounds very efficient," I said. "Dinner is served," Tiffany trilled from the doorway. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with china that looked like it belonged in a museum. The silverware was heavy enough to be weaponry. Tiffany had indeed outdone herself, or rather, the catering company she'd hired had. There was herb-crusted salmon, risotto, and roasted asparagus. As we ate, the conversation stayed shallow. Tiffany talked about her Pilates instructor. Keegan talked about a big consulting project in LA that I knew was a scam. Broderick complained about the tax climate in California. I ate small bites, watching them. They were eating with the gusto of men who thought they had just secured a multi-million-dollar windfall. They had no idea they were sitting on a trapdoor. "So," I said during a lull in the conversation, spearing a piece of asparagus, "I've been thinking about the medical bills, the $180,000. The atmosphere in the room tightened instantly. "What about them?" Broderick asked, wiping his mouth. "Well, it's a substantial amount," I said, keeping my voice light and confused. "And since I'm going to be personally responsible for it, I was thinking, maybe I should hire a forensic accountant to review the estate's liquid assets before I sign, just to be absolutely sure that those debts don't belong to the business." Keegan dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china. "A forensic accountant," Broderick said, his eyes narrowing. "Evelyn, that's completely unnecessary. It would cost thousands of dollars and delay everything by months." "I know," I sighed, "but Arthur was always so meticulous about his record-keeping. I find it strange that he didn't separate the medical expenses. I feel like I owe it to his memory to do a full audit. You know, go through every bank statement, every transaction from the last year." Broderick and Keegan exchanged a look. It was a look of pure panic. An audit would reveal Broderick's embezzlement from the firm and Keegan's wire fraud. "We really don't think that's a good idea," Keegan stammered. "I mean, for your sake, it's just stress. You don't need that stress." "I suppose," I said, letting the threat hang in the air for a moment before reeling it back. "Maybe you're right. I'm just so confused by all the paperwork." "Exactly," Broderick said, leaning forward. "That's why you have us. We handle the numbers, you just handle the transition." "You're right," I said, smiling at him. "I should just trust you. You are his sons after all." Tiffany jumped up, sensing the tension. "Who wants dessert? I made a chocolate torte. Well, I bought it from that bakery on L Street, but I plated it." She rushed to the kitchen. I waited until she was gone. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. "There is one other thing," I said softly. "Yes?" Broderick asked, sounding impatient now. "I've been cleaning out the house, packing up Arthur's things." I took a sip of water. "I found some documents in his desk that I didn't recognize, and a key." Broderick went very still. "A key?" "Yes, an old brass key, and a business card for a bank downtown. Box 379. The color drained from Keegan's face so fast I thought he might faint. Broderick gripped the stem of his wine glass so hard I expected it to shatter. "I didn't know Arthur had a safety deposit box," I continued, playing the role of the bewildered widow to perfection. "Did you?" "No," Broderick said, his voice tight. We weren't aware." "It's strange," I mused. "I thought you handled all his affairs, but this box..." Mrs. Abernathy at the bank said he opened it just 6 months ago, right when he got sick. "You went to the bank?" Broderick demanded, his voice rising. "Of course. I wanted to see if there was a will or instructions." "And," Keegan squeaked, "what was inside?" I looked at them. I saw the sweat beading on Keegan's upper lip. I saw the calculation racing behind Broderick's gray eyes. They were terrified. They knew Arthur had money he hadn't told them about. Or worse, they feared he had evidence of what they had been doing. "Oh, it was very confusing," I said, waving a hand dismissively. Lots of financial papers, old records, a letter. I couldn't make heads or tails of most of it. Legal jargon, you know. You should bring that to us, Broderick said immediately. Tomorrow, bring the box contents to my office. We need to inventory it for the estate. It's legally required. Is it? I asked. Mrs. Abernathy said the box was in my name only. She said it wasn't part of the general estate. Mrs. Abernathy is a bank manager, not a lawyer, Broderick snapped. If those are Dad's assets, they belong to the estate. If you keep them, you could be committing theft, Evelyn. You don't want to go to jail, do you? The threat was blunt and clumsy. He was losing his cool. Oh my, I said, eyes widening. Jail? No, I certainly don't want that. Then bring us the documents, Keegan pleaded. We'll sort it out. We'll make sure everything is proper. That's very sweet of you, I said, but I think I'll keep them for a few days, just to look them over myself. I have a lot of free time now that I'm packing. Evelyn, Broderick said, his voice dropping to a growl. You are playing with fire. You don't understand these things. I understand enough, I said, and for a split second I let the mask slip. I let my voice drop to match his, cold and hard. I understand that Arthur kept secrets from everyone. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Broderick looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. He saw something in my eyes that unsettled him. Tiffany burst back in, carrying a tray of chocolate cake. Dessert, why is everyone so quiet? We were just discussing Dad's filing system, Keegan said, his voice cracking. We ate the cake in silence. It tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced myself to finish every bite. I needed the energy. 10 minutes later, I stood up. I should go. I have a lot of packing to do. We'll see you Friday for the signing, Broderick said, walking me to the door. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Friday, I agreed. As I walked to my car, Broderick didn't wait for me to pull away. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was standing in the driveway, his phone already pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly with his free hand. He was calling his creditors, his lawyer, or maybe he was calling the bank to try and bribe Mrs. Abernathy. It didn't matter. As I turned onto the main road, my own phone rang. The screen displayed a name I had added only hours ago. Donovan Steele ****. I answered on the car's Bluetooth. Mrs. Sterling, Steele's deep voice filled the cabin. I see you've left the lion's den. I have, I said. They are rattled, Mr. Steele. Good, because I just got a ping on my system. Broderick Sterling just tried to access the online portal for the Cayman Trust. He failed, obviously, because he doesn't have the password. But he knows the account exists now. He's looking for the money. He asked me to bring him the documents, I said. He threatened me with jail. Predictable, Steele laughed darkly. Listen, Evelyn, the timeline has moved up. They are going to try to force an emergency probate hearing to seize the contents of that box. They think you're hiding millions that belong to them. I am hiding millions, I said, but they don't belong to them. Exactly, but we need to spring the trap before they can file an injunction. We need to do this tomorrow. Tomorrow? I felt a flutter of nerves. I thought we had until Friday. Broderick is desperate, Steele said. Desperate men do dangerous things. We need to get them in a room, get them to sign the acceptance of the properties, and close the steel door on them before they realize the room is full of gas. Can you meet me at Lawrence Higgins' office tomorrow at 10:00 a.m.? I thought about the fear in Keegan's eyes. I thought about the arrogance in Broderick's voice when he called me mother. I'll be there, I said. Bring the gift deed, Steele said, and Evelyn. Get a good night's sleep. You're going to be a very wealthy woman by lunchtime. I hung up the phone. The road ahead was dark, winding through the oak trees of Granite Bay, but for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I was going. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was hunting. James Mitchell's office was not in the polished steel and glass towers of downtown Sacramento where Lawrence P. Higgins worked. It was in Midtown, located in a converted brick Victorian house sandwiched between a hipster coffee shop and a used bookstore. There was no marble lobby, no receptionist with a headset, and no view of the river. Just a heavy oak door with a frosted glass pane that read, DONOVANSDELE, Attorney AT Law. I pushed the door open. A small bell chimed above my head, a quaint, old-world sound that felt miles away from the sterile silence of Brchdake Us world. The inside smelled of old paper, strong coffee, and lemon polish. It was cluttered but organized, the kind of chaos that suggests a mind that is constantly working. Mrs. Sterling, a voice boomed from the back room, right on time. Donovan Splu stepped out. He was nothing like the lawyers I was used to. He was a bear of a man, perhaps in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair that looked like he cut it himself, and a face that had seen its fair share of trouble. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a crisp white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they had swung hammers before they pushed pens. "Mr. Splu," I said, extending my hand. He gripped it firmly, a handshake that offered strength, not just courtesy. "Please call me Donovan. Your husband did. Come on back. We have a lot to cover before the fireworks start." I followed him into his private office. It was dominated by a massive desk covered in files, but he cleared a space for me. He pointed to a worn leather armchair that looked infinitely more comfortable than the stiff designer seating at Kagan Us house. "I assume you read the letter," Donovan said, sitting down and leaning forward, his eyes intense. "I did," I said. "Arthur said he mortgaged everything." Donovan nodded and pulled a thick file from his drawer. He slapped it onto the desk. "He didn't just mortgage it, Plain. He leveraged it to the absolute hilt. Arthur was a genius. He knew that Brchdake and Kagan are lazy. They see a house, they see a $sign. They don't check the title because they assume the house is paid off. They assume Daddy's money is safe." He opened the file and spread out 3 documents. They were property deeds, but they were stamped with heavy red ink. Leon recorded. "Here is the math," Donovan said, grabbing a pen and scribbling on a legal pad. "The Sacramento house. Market value, $850,000. Outstanding mortgage note held by the Command Trust, $1.2 million. He looked up at me. "The moment the title transfers to them, the property is underwater by $350,000. He wrote down the next number. "The Lake Touch Villa, market value, $750,000. Outstanding mortgage, $800,000. That's another $50,000 in the hole." "So," I said, trying to wrap my mind around it, "if they inherit the properties they owe, $400,000. "More," Donovan grinned, a wolfish expression that made me glad he was on my side. "Because Arthur structured these loans with immediate call clauses upon transfer of death, meaning the bank, which is actually the trust controlled by you, can demand full repayment within 30 days. If they can't pay, the trust forecloses. They lose the properties, but they are still personally liable for the deficiency judgment." "They'll be ruined," I whispered. "They are already ruined," Donovan corrected me. "They just don't know it yet. They're spending money they don't have, counting on an inheritance that is actually a bomb." He pulled out another folder. "Now, let's talk about you. While the real estate is effectively a pile of debt, the cash from those loans, the actual liquid money, was moved." "To the Command Trust," I said. "Correct. $4.7 million from the loans and previous savings. Plus, there is the life insurance. You know about the $200,000 policy they told you about. Arthur knew they'd try to lowball you with that." Donovan pulled out a certificate. "But there is a second policy, a key man insurance policy from the business that lists you as the sole beneficiary. Value, $1 million. My breath caught in my throat. $1 million. "Tax-free," Donovan said. "So, between the trust and the insurance, your net worth as of this morning is approximately $5.7 million, and it is untouchable. It is not part of the probate estate. It is yours, plain, free and clear." I sat back, the leather chair groaning softly. $5.7 million. I could buy 5 houses. I could travel the world. I could vanish. "But," Donovan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious, "money is just safety. Arthur wanted you to have something else. He wanted you to have justice. He reached into the file and pulled out a stack of papers that looked different. These weren't deeds or bank statements. They were transcripts, surveillance photos, copies of forged checks. Arthur knew about the gambling, Donovan said, tapping a photo of Dake at a blackjack table. And he knew about Kagan us fraud, but he wanted proof, irrefutable, court-admissible proof. He slid a document toward me. It was a check drawn on the Sterling business account, made out to cash, signed by Arthur Sterling. Look at the signature, Donovan said. I squinted. It looked like Arthur's signature, but slightly off. This was too looped. The slant was wrong. Dake forged this 3 months ago, Donovan said, to pay off a bookie in Reno. That is felony forgery and embezzlement. And Kagan, we have emails of him directing elderly clients to transfer funds into his personal account. That is wire fraud and elder abuse. Donovan leaned back, crossing his massive arms. Here is the situation plain. We are walking into a meeting with them in an hour. We have 2 weapons. Weapon A is the debt. You can gift them the properties as the new will allows. If they sign, they take the debt. They sink. And Weapon B? I asked. Weapon B is this file. Donovan tapped the criminal evidence. If they refuse to sign, if they try to fight you or sue you or harass you, you drop this on the district attorney's desk. They go to prison, minimum 5 years each. So they have a choice, I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. They can be bankrupt or they can be inmates. Exactly, Donovan said. Arthur gave you the power to be the judge, jury, and executioner. The question is, are you ready to pull the lever? I looked at the photos of my stepsons. I thought about the way Dake had looked at me at the funeral, like I was trash. I thought about Kagan us fake tears. I thought about the bloodline comment. I'm ready, I said. Suddenly, my phone on the desk began to buzz. It vibrated violently against the wood, shattering the quiet. The screen lit up, BRODRICK. Don't answer it yet, Donovan said, checking his watch. My paralegal just served notice to Lawrence Hagan's office that we represent you and that we are in possession of a superseding will. They are panicking. The phone stopped, then it started again immediately. KEGANASTADESK. Then a text message popped up on the screen. Plain, what is going on? Who is Donovan Stplu? Lawrence says he got a fax claiming you have a new will. You need to call me immediately. There are laws against fraud, plain. Don't let some shyster lawyer talk you into doing something stupid. He calls me a shyster, Donovan chuckled, reading the text upside down. That's rich coming from a man who forged his dying father's signature. Another text from Tiffany. Plain, honey, Kagan is hyperventilating. We're all family here. Please don't let strangers come between us. We can work this out. Just come to Lawrence's office. We love you. We love you, I read aloud, my voice flat. They didn't love me yesterday when they gave me 30 days to move out. Fear makes people say all kinds of things, Donovan said, standing up and grabbing his briefcase. It was an old, battered leather case, skyed from years of battles. They are scared because the narrative has changed. Yesterday, you were the victim. Today, you are the threat. He put on a tweed jacket that had patches on the elbows. Are you ready to go to Lawrence's office? I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I checked my reflection in the glass of a bookcase. For 22 years, I had been Mrs. Flood Arthur Sterling. I had been the second wife, the stepmother, the peacemaker. I had walked on eggshells to avoid upsetting the boys. I had swallowed insults to keep the peace. I had made myself small so they could feel big. I looked at the woman in the reflection. She didn't look small anymore. She looked dangerous. I'm ready, I said. I drove my own car to the meeting, following Donovan's beat-up Ford truck. The drive downtown was a blur of familiar streets that suddenly looked different. I passed the restaurant where Arthur and I had our first date. I passed the park where we used to walk on Sundays. Usually, these places made me feel a pang of loss. Today, they felt like monuments to a life that I had to protect. My phone continued to buzz incessantly, in the cup holder. Broderick, pick up the phone. Keegan, Mom, please. Tiffany, we're waiting at the office. Please tell us this is a mistake. I turned the phone off. The silence in the car was empowering. For the first time in days, I wasn't reacting to their noise. I was creating the silence. I thought about Arthur's letter. You are stronger than they are. He had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. He saw a fighter buried under layers of politeness and social grace. He had set up this entire elaborate stage play, the mortgages, the secret accounts, the hidden key, just to give me a chance to find that fighter. I pulled into the parking garage of the high-rise building where Lawrence Higgins had his office. The same garage where I had parked 2 days ago, feeling like a beggar coming to ask for scraps. I parked next to Broderick's silver Mercedes. It was parked crookedly, straddling 2 lines, a sign of his haste, his panic. I stepped out of the car. The air in the garage was cool and smelled of exhaust and concrete. Donovan was waiting for me by the elevator bank. He held his briefcase like a shield. Remember, he said as I approached, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to apologize. You hold the cards. They are just bluffing with an empty hand. I know, I said. The elevator arrived with a ping. We stepped inside. 15th floor, Donovan said, pressing the button. As the elevator rose, I felt a physical sensation of shedding my old skin. The grief was still there. I would always mourn Arthur, but the helplessness was gone. The fear of poverty was gone. The desperation to be liked by 2 men who despised me was gone. The doors opened onto the plush lobby of Higgins and Associates. The receptionist looked up, startled, as if she had been warned that a hurricane was approaching. Mrs. Sterling, she stammered, Mr. Higgins and the family are in conference room B. Thank you, I said, walking past her without stopping. I walked down the long hallway, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. Click, 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 like a ticking clock. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the conference room. I could hear voices inside, shouting. Insane. You can't just produce a new will out of thin air. That was Broderick. Calm down, Sid Broderick. We need to see the document first. That was Lawrence, sounding exhausted. I paused with my hand on the brass handle. I looked at Donovan. He nodded. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room went silent instantly. Broderick was standing at the head of the table, his face red, a vein throbbing in his temple. Keegan was slumped in a chair, head in his hands. Tiffany was packing by the window, clutching a designer handbag like a life preserver. Lawrence Higgins looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Evelyn, Broderick barked, though his voice wavered slightly. Finally, what the hell is this stunt? I didn't answer him. I walked to the other end of the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. I placed my purse on the table. I folded my hands. Donovan Steele walked in behind me, closed the door, and stood behind my chair like a bodyguard. He dropped his heavy briefcase onto the table with a loud asterisk thud. Good morning, everyone, I said, my voice calm, cool, and utterly in control. Please sit down. We have some practical matters to discuss. Broderick stared at me. He looked at the calm woman sitting at the table, and for the first time, he realized that the stepmother he thought he knew was dead. Who is this? Broderick demanded, pointing at Donovan. This is Donovan Steele, I said. He is Arthur's attorney, and mine. Dad didn't have another attorney, Keegan squeaked. Dad had a lot of things you didn't know about, I said, locking eyes with him. Shall we begin? The trap was set. The door was locked, and the lions were about to realize they were trapped in the cage with the tamer. The conference room at Higgins and Associates had never felt so small. The air conditioning was humming, but the air was thick, stagnant with the scent of fear and expensive cologne. Broderick stood at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the mahogany edge. This is absurd, he spat, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Who is this man, Evelyn? You can't just drag a stranger into a private probate meeting. Sit down, Broderick, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight it had never held before. It was the voice of the woman who held the deed to the cage he was trapped in. "I will not sit down," he shouted, turning to Lawrence. "Lawrence, call security, get this thug out of here." Lawrence P. Higgins looked at Donovan's steel, then at the heavy briefcase on the table, and finally at me. He slowly took off his glasses. "Broderick, please. If Mrs. Sterling has retained new counsel, she has every right to have him present. Sit down." Broderick glared, but he sank into his chair. Keegan was already shrinking into his, looking like a child waiting for the principal's belt. Tiffany was chewing on a manicured nail, her eyes darting between us. "Thank you," Donovan rumbled. He didn't sit. He stood beside me, a towering figure in a tweed jacket. He opened the briefcase with a definitive asterisk snap asterisk. "Let's cut to the chase," Donovan began. "You are operating under the assumption that the last will and testament drafted by Broderick Sterling 6 months ago is the binding document. Is that correct?" "It was notarized," Broderick snapped. "It's ironclad." "It was superseded," Donovan said, pulling a blue folder from his case and sliding it across the polished table to Lawrence. "By this." Lawrence picked it up. His eyes scanned the first page, then flipped to the signature block. "My God," he whispered. "Dated 6 weeks ago, witnessed by—" He looked up at Donovan. "By you." "And recorded with the county clerk the same day," Donovan added. "It's bulletproof, Lawrence. The previous will is void." "This is a forgery," Broderick yelled, reaching for the document. "Touch that paper," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "And I will have you arrested for tampering with evidence before you leave this building." Broderick froze, his hand hovering in midair. What does it say?" Keegan whispered. "It says," I spoke up, "that Arthur left everything to me. The house, the villa, the business, the cash, all of it. The decision of what, if anything, you receive was left entirely to my discretion." "That's impossible," Tiffany gasped. "Arthur loved the boys." "He did," I said, feeling a prick of tears that I quickly suppressed. "He loved them enough to try to save them from themselves. But you didn't let him. You plotted. You stole. You waited for him to die like vultures circling a wounded animal." "We never," Keegan started. "Shut up," I said. "Donovan, show them." Donovan reached into his bag again. This time, he didn't slide the folder. He opened it and spread the contents out on the table like a winning poker hand. The photos of Broderick at the blackjack tables in Reno. The markers showing $230,000 in gambling debt. The emails from Keegan's consulting firm detailing the Ponzi scheme. The forged check with Arthur's shaky, fake signature. The silence that followed was absolute. Broderick stared at the photo of himself, his face gray. Keegan looked like he was going to vomit. "This," Donovan said, tapping the forged check, "is a felony, embezzlement and forgery. And this," he pointed to Keegan's emails, "is wire fraud and elder abuse. We have enough here to put both of you in federal prison for 5 to 10 years. Lawrence Higgins looked pale. He looked at the documents, then at his clients. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice horrified. "Broderick, did you forge Arthur's signature?" Broderick didn't answer. He couldn't. "Now," I said, folding my hands, "we have a decision to make. I could turn these files over to the district attorney this afternoon. I could watch you both get handcuffed and led out of this building." Tiffany let out a sob. "Please, Evelyn, no, we have a reputation, we're family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You keep using that word. Let's talk about family. Arthur wanted to teach you a lesson. He wanted you to understand consequences." I reached into my purse and pulled out the final document. The gift deed asterisk. "I have prepared a compromise," I said. "I am willing to give you exactly what you asked for, the Sacramento estate, the Lake Tahoe villa." Broderick's head snapped up. Hope, pathetic and desperate, flickered in his eyes. You are." "Yes," I said. "I am transferring the titles to Broderick and Keegan jointly, today." "But," Donovan interjected, "there is a catch." "There's always a catch," Keegan muttered. "Arthur was a smart man," Donovan said. He knew you were coming for the property, so 6 months ago he leveraged them. He took out mortgages against the full value of both estates. Broderick frowned. What? The Sacramento house, Donovan listed, is valued at $850,000. It currently carries a mortgage lien of $1.2 million. The Tahoe villa is valued at $750,000. It carries a lien of $800,000. I watched the realization hit them. It was slow, then crushing. The money from those loans, Donovan continued, was moved into a protected trust for Evelyn. That money is gone. What remains are the buildings and the debt. If you accept the properties, I said, you accept the mortgages. You will own 2 houses that are underwater by a combined $600,000, and the notes are due in 30 days. You're giving us debt, Broderick whispered. You're giving us bankruptcy. I'm giving you the inheritance you fought so hard for, I said. You wanted the house, take it. You wanted the villa, it's yours. We won't sign, Broderick said, slamming his hand on the table. We refuse the inheritance, we'll walk away. I was hoping you'd say that, Donovan said calmly. He picked up the criminal evidence file. Because Evelyn's offer is a package deal. Option A, you sign the gift deed, accept the properties and the debt, and assume full liability. You leave Evelyn alone forever. Option B, you refuse and I walk this file down the street to the DA's office. Donovan checked his watch. The DA leaves for lunch in 20 minutes. I can make it if I walk briskly. The room spun. I could see the wheels turning in Broderick's head. If they took the houses, they would be financially ruined. They would have to declare bankruptcy. They would lose their credit, their status, their lifestyle. But if they didn't, they would go to prison. They would lose their licenses to practice law and business. They would lose their freedom. It was the perfect trap, Arthur's final checkmate. You can't do this, Tiffany wailed. We'll be homeless. You gave me 30 days to get out of my own home, I said coldly. You told me $20,000 was enough to start over. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're scrappy. Broderick looked at Lawrence. Do something. Lawrence shook his head, closing his file. I'm sorry, Broderick, if that evidence is real, I can't help you. And frankly, after seeing how you treated Evelyn, I don't want to. Broderick slumped. The fight went out of him like air leaving a balloon. He looked at Keegan. Keegan was crying silently, tears dripping onto his expensive silk tie. Give me the pen, Broderick whispered. Donovan slid the gift deed across the table. I watched as Broderick Sterling, the man who had terrified me for years, the man who had looked at me with such disdain, signed his name with a shaking hand. He was signing away his future. He was signing his own financial death warrant to stay out of a cage. He passed the pen to Keegan. Keegan signed, sniffling. Donovan snatched the papers back the moment the ink was dry. He checked the signatures. Notarized, he said to Lawrence. Lawrence stamped them. It's done, Donovan said. I stood up. My legs felt strong. The 30-day clock starts now, I said to them, echoing the words they had said to me just 3 days ago. I expect the house to be in your name by the end of the month. I'll be moved out by Sunday. You can deal with the bank after that. Evelyn, Keegan said, looking up with red, puffy eyes. Why, we're family. I looked at them one last time. The greedy, broken men who had underestimated their father and underestimated me. Arthur sends his regards, I said. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. The fallout was swift and brutal. In Sacramento, secrets don't stay secret for long. Within 2 months, the news had spread through the country club set. Broderick Sterling filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The gift of the houses had been the tipping point. The banks foreclosed on both properties when he couldn't refinance the massive debt. He lost his partnership at the law firm, not because of the crimes, which I kept secret as promised, but because a bankrupt lawyer is a liability. He was last seen driving a 5-year-old Honda, working as a junior legal consultant for a firm in Fresno. Keegan fared worse. With no inheritance to pay back his fraudulent investments, his Ponzi scheme collapsed. He managed to avoid prison only by selling everything he owned and moving in with his mother in a small apartment in Dolly City. Tiffany filed for divorce the day the Mercedes was repossessed. She moved to Los Angeles and was reportedly looking for a new, older husband. They were alive, they were free, but they were exactly what they had tried to make me, destitute and irrelevant. As for me, 3 months later, I sat on the porch of a cottage in Carmel by the sea. The air here was different. It smelled of salt spray, jasmine, and freedom. The Pacific Ocean churned against the cliffs below, a vast, rhythmic reminder of the power of nature. The cottage was small, much smaller than the Sterling estate, but it was mine. I had bought it with cash. $1.2 million, a drop in the bucket of the fortune Arthur had left me. I spent my mornings in the garden. I planted roses, but not the formal, stiff roses of the Sacramento house. I planted wild, climbing roses that grew where they wanted. I planted lavender and rosemary. I got dirt under my fingernails, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to scrub it out. I was sipping tea, watching the fog roll in when a car pulled into my gravel driveway. It was a modest Subaru. A young woman stepped out. She had dark curly hair and bright, intelligent eyes. She looked familiar. "Mrs. Sterling," she called out, waving. I walked down the steps. "Yes." "I'm Maya," she said, smiling. "Maya Steele, Donovan's daughter." "Oh," I smiled. "Donovan speaks of you often. You're the social worker." "I am," she said, coming to the gate. "Dad told me what you did, how you handled everything." "Your father was a good ally," I said. "I couldn't have done it without him." "He said you were the toughest client he ever had," Maya laughed. "Listen, I know you're enjoying your privacy, but Dad said you were looking for something to do, a way to use the resources." I nodded. The money was sitting in the trust. I had everything I needed. I didn't need $5 million to be happy. I just needed peace. But I knew Arthur wouldn't want the money to sit idle. "I work with women," Maya said, her expression turning serious. "Women who are trapped, financial abuse, elderly women whose children are trying to take advantage of them, wives whose husbands hide assets. They don't have the money for lawyers like my dad." I thought about the woman I had been in that conference room. The woman who thought she had $20,000 and 30 days to live. I thought about the terror of being old, alone, and broke. "They need an Arthur," I said softly. "They need an Evelyn," Maya corrected me. I looked out at the ocean. I thought about the brass key. It had opened a box, but it had also unlocked me. "Come inside, Maya," I said, opening the gate. "Let's talk. I think the Arthur Sterling Foundation for Financial Justice has a nice ring to it, don't you?" Maya beamed. We went inside, and as I poured her a cup of tea, I felt a presence in the room. A warmth. The scent of sandalwood and old tobacco. Arthur was gone, but his story, our story, wasn't over. It was just beginning. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you have given them the debt or sent them to prison? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end.